Jason is a good friend that I've worked with in multiple circumstances, but he has a really interesting background at some legendary product companies that have been huge innovators, even when big. Take Apple and Amazon, but also been a key founder in a very early stage company, Canara, that is really worked through many of the same issues that you're working with. He currently runs an analysis and consulting group called Silicon Valley Intelligence Group, and he's a board advisor and mentor at StartX, which is Stanford's startup accelerator. And so he is working in helping other early stage founders how to do really important creative work. And he was an undergraduate at Whitman College. I was up there with him at Whitman last week. Had a great time talking to the president and a panel of experts. And he did a master's and an MBA at Harvard. And I think he is in a great position to talk about product discovery, product strategy, and especially AI product management. So, Jason, I hope you're there. I didn't double check, but welcome.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Just in the interest of time, and you can drop this into the chat, I could talk about a 0 to 1 product I did at Apple or one I did at a startup. I'm going to focus on one of those. So if you want to drop that in the chat, and maybe I can check that in a minute, because that will be later on in me talking about my material. Let's see. Allow WebEx to share your content.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Hopefully I don't have to quit and restart. Okay. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that. Product strategy for startups. Hopefully we're there. Chris, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I will take it from here. So thanks, Chris. This is an amazing course that Chris is offering for free. I know startups, they're giving up slice of equity, Y Combinator, and other places in order to get this kind of knowledge. So hopefully you're all appreciative of what Chris is doing. And Chris, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. So I want to talk about product strategy for startups. I've had big company roles, which I think are relevant. But given that this is a focus here in terms of, you must be interested in a startup, whether you're doing one or not. Just a quick about me. Chris gave an intro. I've been 20 years in tech. I'm in Mountain View, California, in the Valley. I'm not a technical background person. I don't have a CS. I've learned tech over time, but I come into this with both an MBA and also just sort of a general liberal arts background. I was a philosophy major with a Mandarin minor. Yeah, so I've been at big companies. I've been a startup CEO. I'm angel investing now. I'm doing startup advising at Stanford StartX. Chris was kind enough to come up and be part of an AI conference that we did, which was quite interesting. I would just say one of the things that made me successful is I've got a network of friends, colleagues, experts, entrepreneurs, and mentors that have really made this possible. Chris checks all these boxes for me, which is why we talk a lot, work together at a couple different companies. In terms of the products I worked on early in my career, I spent 7 years at Apple. iPhone 3G launched the week that I joined, so was early in that iPhone rocket ship that happened at Apple. On the software and services side, though, so I was in a little bit of a different position from people who were demoing and coming up with the next generation of iPhone. I then went on to found a computer vision startup. We talked about deep learning back then rather than AI. This was pre-Gen AI. Did that for about 3 years. Went on to AWS here in Palo Alto. Worked on computer vision, sensor fusion, industrial AI. Again, a lot of AI at edge. Joined Cisco, did a beat in collaboration, but spent most of my time building a security platform for multiple products and layering in an AI and data layer. And as Chris mentioned, I'm primarily a startup advisor at StartX now, although doing a bit of consulting as well with a cross-functional team of senior folks. I will say that last week, the startup that I co-founded sold, which is a good feeling. It's a good feeling for a couple of reasons. I would say primarily is when you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into founding a startup, you want it to go out and do something positive in the world. You want it to live on in some form. The money is nice. I didn't get a life-changing amount of money from this, but it's very satisfying, and it was a long road. When we think about product leaders for startups, there usually is no product manager. So the product manager is very often the founding CEO, or it is the technical co-founder or co-founders. Those are really your choices. Pick one. And somebody has to lead here. My experience has been that the more common one is the CEO, but not always. And I was a secondary product leader in my startup. Some product influences, I'll drop a couple markers on. Early in my career at Apple, really learning about craftsmanship. A good idea is about 10% of a good product. The other 90% is craftsmanship, sweating the details, keeping 5,000 things in your head, working through the trade-offs, working with a team, arguing over products. And that was extremely formative for me early in my career. Doing a 0 to 1 product, and I did that again even before Apple at a company called Good Technology, which was very interesting, and we did software and hardware. And then later at Conversa, previously called Deep Vision, which was a 0 to 1 in a startup environment. Amazon was extremely influential for me in terms of the working backwards method, and a lot of books on this. Also, early in my career, I was extremely fortunate to become acquainted with Marty Kagan, who is a mentor, and he's really the man in terms of startup advice and product advice generally in Silicon Valley. There are books on all these things, working backwards, a lot of books. Apple product books are a little harder to find. I do like Insanely Simple by Ken Segal, and Marty Kagan has 3 books. Everyone should read all 3 books. They're dense, they're packed with insights. Read them. A little bit of product thinking for me. This is especially useful for founders. What are not products? Technology is not a product. And this is the most common thing that I see early stage startups do. They have a technology, they build a technology, they try and sell a technology. Wrong, right? And just technology is often part of a product, but it is not a product in and of itself. A good business idea is not a product. Again, a good component of it, but a good business idea itself is, it's just the germ of what what might become a startup. Intellectual property is not a product. So someone with a PhD dissertation does not have a product. And that's sometimes surprising to that PhD. Custom software development, where you're going in and you're building something for what customer, can be extremely lucrative and interesting and satisfying. You're not building a product here. You're not building a scalable product that many companies will use. So just some things to be aware of here. Good products, on the other hand, they solve a really big customer problem. And, as a CEO or a product manager, this is really your job. And if you can't figure this out, you need to go back and work on this until you've got one. It also has to be usable by customers. Sometimes you can build a product that solves a big problem, but it's really too complicated and it's hard to use. You won't get adoption. You have to have a product that engineering can build. And this is really something your engineering leaders have to figure out, your technical builders, because you can have the best product in the world and the best design in the world, and if it's too expensive or not possible to build, you don't have a product or startup. It also has to work for the business. And I will say, as a product manager, this is the thing that I took the longest to learn. Finance is the language of business. And as a startup CEO in particular, you will spend a great amount of time talking about money and how the business works and how the product feeds into the money. But it has to work for the business, regardless, unless you're going to run a nonprofit or you have a trust fund and you're able to, sustain a burn for a long time. I didn't have any of those problems. I also think that good products, have to be creative. And for me, it really had to be something that would change the world for the better. I went to business school. A lot of my friends went into private equity. Not sure they changed the world for the better. I don't say that at college reunions, but for me, this was really critical for building good products and certainly building a startup. Chris has talked a lot about customer feedback. I'm going to hammer on this a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, because I think if you don't do that, you can fall into a trap of feeling like you have facts and you've got proper assumptions when they are incorrect or they change. And you need to adjust that with product feedback and customer feedback. And this is circular, right? It has to go on and on. As I mentioned, it has to work for the business. In order to do that, you have to run the numbers. You have to build a financial model that you believe, not just that you can toss over the fence to a VC. And as a part of this, usually engineering is the biggest piece, especially in the early days. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here. I don't believe fully remote teams are usually successful for innovative startups, period. Doesn't mean you won't have a fully remote team. Doesn't mean you won't have some remote teams as a piece of your team. But I think there are many, many products, probably most startups, where you need some level of co-location. And Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, these companies aren't doing this to be mean. They're doing this because it's what's required. And I think it's really important for us to think about that and be very honest. This is inconvenient often. You can do it with a fully remote team, but I think it's much more difficult. So I'm going to come back to this. You are not the customer. And one of the things that's nice about not being the customer is you can admit that you don't know yet, but you're going to find out from the customer. You also will get to different places where you don't know whether to go right or left. The nice thing is you don't have to know. You can loop back to the customer. And for any of you who are fans of The Big Lebowski, we all have opinions, right? Investors have opinions, your co-founders have opinions. I certainly have opinions. But if you can't validate that with the customer, that's just like your opinion, man. This is funny, but I think this is really serious, and we should all be aware of this. I had a company early on. We made T-shirts that said, "I'm not the customer." This is actually pretty impactful because people wore them around the office, and it became a norm. Customer product and discovery, I think, is a really big piece of what makes startups and products successful. One well-known technique is something called a PR FAQ that comes out of Amazon. This is not a marketing document. It's kind of a bad name from my perspective. This is a strategy document, and this is a document that you read and debate to align teams around a product strategy. So you start with the customer. Who is the customer? What are their problems? How can you align all the subsequent work around making sure that this is the thing you're working on? And this is a lot of interviews. It's a lot of customer visits. You're gathering data. It's also just a lot of face-to-face flying around on planes for in-person on-site feedback. Zoom and WebEx are just not a substitute for this. The second piece is you actually write all this down. Before any code is written or any prototypes are built, you really, in text, describe the finished product as if it already includes, it already exists with the problem and what product it solves, why it really matters to customers and is different than options they already have. And really sort of a call to action as to why people might want to buy this. And if it's not compelling, the idea just isn't ready. It doesn't mean it might not be ready. Also, you might have something that's ready, but you don't have an internal alignment that the company isn't willing to pay for it. So that's important. Writing, I'll just drop a piece on this. Joan Didion, who's a famous author, said, I don't know what I think until I write it down. Or if you're thinking without writing, you just think you're thinking. And writing is not something you can outsource to ChatGPT. So the other piece is frequently asked questions, which is really, what are customer questions? What are investor questions? What are internal questions? And this just forces clarity on the details that you don't get to in the press release. There's a lot of resources you can look at around this, and I encourage you to read about it. A second piece, which I pulled from Marty Kagan, is continuous discovery, where for really important and your best ideas, you're running a series of experiments, primarily using prototypes, ideally as high fidelity prototypes as you can have, that enable us to get in front of the customer and work with the customer and the prototype to discover effective solutions to their problems and the problems that my team or my company has been tasked to solve. Customers don't really know what's possible until they see it. So this is the way you get the best customer feedback. And it's iterative. You're always going back. You can take an early prototype and get to it. Did I have votes for Apple or startup product?
Startup is where the votes were.
Got it. I'm going to go really quickly through Find My iPhone. This is a big problem, and I don't think it took a lot of thinking for us to know this was a big problem. Get off a plane, leave a restaurant. Where's my iPhone? We looked at this, and we did not have authorization to build the product. So this was a dark product or skunkworks product. We had some assets though. We had a web app on MobileMe. I joined the MobileMe team about 3 weeks before they launched. It was not a successful launch, but we had this asset there of a website where we could push out products and web apps. I also early on we wanted to have maps in the address book on the Mac, and so I on my own worked to work with the mid-level person at Google, and we got an unlimited enterprise license for use in MobileMe, which Google thought didn't matter. So we actually had a free open-ended license to use Google Maps. Not known to consumers, we at Apple also had enterprise mobile device management, called MDM sometimes, which would allow companies to lock down a device, remotely erase a device. It was really table stakes to get into the enterprise. Most people didn't know this. Certainly consumers didn't know this. I came out of an enterprise wireless background, so I knew how this worked. We were able to quickly mock up a prototype and test. We did not have much support internally within Apple other than our own VP. Marketing didn't want to touch this. But we were able to build a product that was extremely simple. 3 features: send a message, lock the device, wipe the device if you needed to. Very few features. AT&T had a competitive product with 12 or more features. So we were at a feature deficit. But we had a web app and we had an app eventually on devices. And we were really a viral success. This is we didn't have any kind of marketing launch. There was no press release. We weren't an Apple ad. We just launched darkly in the store. And we started to really get this sort of viral avalanche of good reviews. So first thing, people had to actually discover it, right, which was difficult. But once they did, it was almost like finding an Easter egg. People all wanted to find it. And we got these really funny stories. CNN, we'd been out for a week. A guy lost his iPhone in a snowbank getting off the subway in New York. He used Find My iPhone to ping it, and we didn't design it to have a sound that could penetrate a snowbank, but I guess it did. Somebody pursued an iPhone thief across state lines. They reportedly did a citizen's arrest, which is not part of that violated our terms of service. I'm not sure how those work, but we felt it was a bad idea. There were also a number of examples where iPhone was used to track cheating spouses. Again, not a problem we thought we were addressing, but this is a high need for some customers. And so, some of the takeaways is we weren't first, but we were simple. We weren't marketed. We weren't widely available, but we had a great story with an obvious pain point. We had a very simple product to use. It was easy to understand. It was also relatively novel, and we had just this viral discussion that happened on this. It's also noting that we were doing this within a big, highly profitable company. So we could build a free app and service for a very large existing customer base in a very profitable company, which allowed us to not have to solve the business problem, really, although we enhanced the device experience. My startup experience was at Conversa, which we originally named Deep Vision. And our focus was started off, it was me and it was a couple of Stanford PhDs, two technical founders. And what we were focused on, and I was really a storyteller and the business person, it was a novel approach to computer vision on edge devices. This is 10 years ago. We had some prior insights. They had basic research in their PhD dissertation. I had mobile experience from Apple and other places. And these are the assumptions in the background that we took into the startup. Our vision when we started was people needed to run inference at the edge. They needed to get results at the edge without necessarily putting a huge model on a device. And our initial solution was an edge processing software stack for low power environments. The idea was to do the software stack first on other people's CPUs and build our own processor later. We were focused on mobile phones, mostly because of my background in consumer electronics. We made a lot of mistakes. We had the wrong customer. We ignored enterprises. We ignored the obvious use case in IP cameras. We didn't really talk to other chip companies. And our timing was off. We were kind of in this prehistoric age, even of AI, much less edge AI. And we didn't really have technical software expertise on the team. We had hardware expertise, but that was a blind spot. We had founder misalignment, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this escalated into a founder dispute. And there's a Chinese chengyu or sort of proverb, which is same bed, different dreams, which is led to some interesting pieces. So we had a dispute about what product to build. And we really had big arguments about in year 3. The good news is this: we were doing this in the open. This was not passive aggressive. No one was hiding this. There was no sort of, none of this was happening in the background. This was a tough debate and sometimes a bit of a brawl that happened in the open. And it was me having an argument with my two technical co-founders. So I was in the minority here. And I eventually left. But I left in a way that the dispute didn't kill the company. And in fact, I helped and identified a semiconductor CEO that we hired. He put a new focus on the chip first software. Well, they were just going to do the chip, but they ended up adding software later, which would have been my primary focus. And they shifted from the wrong customer to the right customer. They were able to raise a lot of money from VCs, and eventually they had the right timing. It only took 10 years, but Gen AI came along, and so they had the right product at the right time. Not necessarily for big business, but for others who were looking for alternative to GPUs. So some of the takeaways I would have from this is the company survived what usually kills companies. I would say more companies die of founder disputes than lots of other things. Probably number one is they run out of money. But founder disputes are right behind that. Founders generally value control over, 10 years is an overnight success in the making. Yeah, it didn't feel like at the time. There was a sort of reorganization to focus on the chip first. Then they added software when they felt like they had to. It also created a lot of IP, which was interesting to investors and potential acquirers. It wasn't a good business, where there were early customer POCs, where there was a lot of learning, and they got a lot of signal from that, which was interesting, both to the company and also to potential acquirers, and they got to the right customer in the end, which is really enterprise cameras and chip partners in the end. And I think the eventual buyer, which is a Dutch semiconductor company, was really okay, with what was essentially a pre-revenue company, even after 10 years. And they just had the right timing in the last year. And timing for a startup is really everything sometimes. Or it's certainly a critical component to having a successful company and a successful exit. And we really launched this way too early. Worked out, but 10 years is a long time to keep a company running, and $60 million is a lot of money to take from VCs over a long period of time. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to just drop a couple of markers on thinking through AI and what that means for developing products. It's a very noisy area right now. Lenny and Friends has a really interesting take on this. There are other places to get insights. But there are some salient things that I think are really important. There are a lot of, when we think about an AI PM, I think, are you building AI or are you using AI? Because there are products that really create AI, or they create foundational AI tools. Some of these are OpenAI foundation models like Llama. Those are the best known, but there are also really important tools out there. SageMaker existed before Gen AI, but it's very useful still now. Databricks is a huge AI company now. They're really building guardrails, and I think that that's a big business. So these are products they're really creating foundational AI that other people will use. And products then use AI, right? Cursor is an example. They don't have their own foundation model, although sometimes people think they do. Apps like Figma or Notion are a big piece. These are products that use AI. So these are PMs that need to know how to use AI, not create AI. It's a different skill set. It's a different focus. You're seeing this in enterprise with Notion, which has a lot of AI built in. Figma and Notion are very interesting in terms of apps that existed pre-Gen AI that have done a great job of integrating in AI tools into their current product and making that very valuable. I would also say that Harvey is a very interesting example of enterprise vertical. So this is Gen AI for lawyers, putting a lot of lawyers out of business. Glean is another very interesting one where it's enterprise, funding enterprise insights. Glean has been in a bit of a fist fight with some other enterprise SaaS companies who don't want them to grab their data, Slack and Salesforce and others. But I think it's a very interesting idea, solving a huge problem across enterprise that we've struggled with for a very long time. The interesting thing I think about all of these products that AI uses is they have relatively interesting, unique data sets that they're able to build on top of. They have engineering data sets. They've got a lot of data sets on creatives. Notion knows a lot about you if you're a user. Harvey has a lot of legal, interesting data sets built in. Glean now knows a lot about all kinds of enterprises. And so they don't have to create AI, but they need, this is one of the ways in which they are using AI to build up a moat or drive a differentiator overall. So I think you have to think through, is my company or my role, are we using AI or are we building AI? Because those are very different things. It's almost like, are we building hardware or are we building software? You need to know which business you're in, and you need to know what kind of product leader you need. I'm a software product leader, even though I was at a company that built chips. That's really my zone where I've been most focused and creative and where I have the best level of skills. People are certainly learning to create AI, and that's relatively new at a large scale like this. So when we think about what does this mean for PMs, we're using these models which we didn't build ourselves and we didn't train. So 3 years ago, most products and most companies, they were getting their own data, they were doing their own labeling, they were doing training, they were putting it in the field, it wouldn't work, you'd bring it back, you'd retrain. This is what I did at AWS across industrial and computer vision. It's very expensive, it's very time consuming. That's all changed, right? You can use Anthropic or Llama or OpenAI. And in these cases, it's a lot about thinking through model evaluation. Is this the right model for us? Is this the right price? Does it do the right things? Is it doing the right thing in my product? And how do we track that and assess that? Bit of a different skill for PMs. And I think people are learning how to do this, but we didn't have to do this before when we were building very deterministic products. One of the ways we also think about models is, how do we fine tune a model? How do we get what we want out of that? Prompt engineering, I would say, was an early piece that we've all experienced by asking multiple questions in ChatGPT or Claude. But there are also interesting fine-tuning products out there and approaches out there, which PMs and engineering teams and companies are learning to do. I mentioned data moats ahead of time. There are many data sets that are proprietary or vertical specific, which the big foundation models don't have access to or haven't gone after yet. And that's a source of differentiation. And PMs need to get really, really comfortable with data. How do you find it? How do you curate it? How do you organize it? How do you cleanse it? How do you build compound models where I've got an internal model, maybe using open source that I've created for certain things, but I also need to call out to a foundation model without pumping all of my data into OpenAI. Also related to this, and this is true whether you're building a consumer app or especially an enterprise app, how do you worry about guardrails? Guarding against hallucinations, making sure that your outputs are safe as well as accurate and secure. And there are a lot of techniques around this in terms of ensuring the security of the whole ML DevOps pipeline. Also thinking through when you're done, how do you test it using red teams and other pieces here. These are relatively new things that we didn't do in the DevOps world when we were just building software, and it wasn't as iterative based on this. And at the end of the day, users have to trust this, and you have to give some level of transparency and ability for them to give feedback. I'll also say that when you're choosing models, the economics matter. And sometimes you don't need to pay for the biggest and best model. Many times you don't, especially in enterprise. You see a lot of use of Llama and open source in enterprise where they are able to do the product trade-offs and the economics of using big foundation models don't pencil out. And, I talked about speaking the language of business, and I think working through this is going to become increasingly important. You're seeing foundation models start to become a bit commoditized. We'll see where that goes. But this changes the economics and the cost of these things. And this is a moving target, and PMs and startup CEOs and startup teams need to be very aware of all this. I talked about PRFAQs before, and one of the reasons that's really useful is clear writing drives clear thinking. I see a lot of PMs and even PM influencers out there who are talking about using ChatGPT to just completely write your PRFAQ. I think that's a wrong approach, and you're outsourcing some pieces that you really can't outsource. You can use it to improve your PRFAQ or your product strategy docs, but if you're using AI to completely generate what you've got. On the other end, your engineering team can see, and it's sort of crap in, crap out, and it's not really a good place to start. So you can do a little research using AI. You can use it to improve what you've written. But don't pretend you wrote a product strategy doc, because it's really obvious to everyone. And I'll just say that the foundation models are not creative, right? They're a lagging indicator of what's been done before. They're not usually cutting edge. And so this is humorous, and I think we've experienced this in email. But you can't outsource the hard thinking, especially if you're building something new, going from 0 to 1. A lot of you have heard about vibe coding. We're kind of in a vibe coding hype cycle right now. If you haven't used vibe coding tools, Lovable or others that are out there, you should. And the reason PMs should use vibe coding is not because you're going to build a production ready app. You're probably not going to, unless you're also have a CS background. But what it does is it lets you get to that really high fidelity first prototype, and you're seeing really interesting abilities. You can actually communicate with your engineering, your design team, with design and code. It might not be that good, but it's a way to accelerate that kind of conversation that hasn't been possible before, unless you had a lot of cross-functional skills. And you also can really accelerate the conversation you have with your customers. I think this kind of skill set for PMs is it's not going to really be optional going forward. I think there will be different versions of prototyping and vibe coding. I don't think you're actually automating your insights. You're automating the creation of a prototype, and you're, even just for yourself, you're able to think through this visually and even technically to some degree. This is a skill that's worth picking up. Vibe coding's really only been around for about a year. So if you feel like you're behind, you're not that behind, and it's not that hard. You just need to do it, which is really just a lot of what Gen AI is. You can read about it. You can watch little courses on it, but you don't really get a sense for it until you're using it. You don't have to write Python in order to go out and be able to use these tools. And I think vibe coding is one of the most accessible pieces of this. So a lot of hype around this, but I think getting your hands on one of the tools and writing a product strategy doc with some features, pushing that up to an app like Lovable, and just getting a sense for what it can do and how you can use it to communicate with teams. A bit of warning here, you're starting to see a little blurring between PM, what they do, design, and what they do, and engineering and what they do. And vibe coding and Gen AI is an example of this. Vibe coding is sometimes threatening to your design and engineering partners. Don't think it has to be, but I do think it's worth positioning why you're using vibe coding as a product leader, so that it's not unproductive. A lot of engineers and designers appreciate this because it accelerates their conversation with product, and they can have discussions about prototypes and designs and code rather than just something you've written, which is a good place.